In a quiet little town surrounded by tall pine trees and calm fields, people lived simple lives. Days started early, shops closed before dark, and neighbors often waved to one another from their porches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew who lived where, who worked where, and even what kind of dog they had. Life was predictable, safe, and peaceful. Among the people, there was a man who worked as a repair technician. He fixed radios, washing machines, and almost anything people brought to his small workshop near the main street. He wasn't the kind of man anyone paid much attention to. He kept his head down, did his work quietly, and rarely spoke about himself. When people came to collect their repaired items, he smiled politely and said, "It's ready now." That was all. No one really knew what his life was like outside of work. He lived alone in a small rented house not far from the cemetery. Some thought he preferred solitude, others simply didn't care enough to ask. But behind that quiet routine there was something else going on, something that no one in town would have ever imagined. A few months earlier he had met a woman through a customer who often came to his shop. She was different from most people around. She spoke freely, laughed easily, and had a charm that drew attention wherever she went. She was married, though not to someone from the town. Her husband worked in another city and was rarely around. She often came alone to visit her relatives nearby, and that was how their paths crossed. Their first few meetings were ordinary: small talk, a shared cup of tea, a casual walk. But slowly, those moments became longer. The woman enjoyed his quiet nature. She said he listened better than most. He, on the other hand, had never met anyone who made him feel seen and alive like she did. What started as friendship turned into something deeper, something secret. For weeks they met whenever she visited town. Sometimes they drove to the lake. Sometimes they sat near the old cemetery road, where no one would disturb them. They spoke about their dreams, about what made them unhappy, about things they couldn't share with anyone else. But secrets never stay light. Over time, the man began to want more. He wanted her to stay, to leave everything behind and start a new life with him. She laughed it off at first, saying things were not that simple. But his longing turned into something darker, a quiet, growing obsession that he himself didn't fully understand. When she stopped answering his calls one week, he began driving past her relative's house, hoping to see her. He waited outside her street in the evenings. Every day he told himself it was just to talk, to understand why she had changed. But deep down he feared the truth, that she might have chosen to end things. Finally, after almost 2 weeks of silence, she called. Her voice was calm but distant. She said she was coming to town one last time and wanted to meet him. "We need to talk," she said softly. He agreed instantly, not knowing those 3 words would twist his life forever. That night he barely slept. He replayed every moment they'd shared, her laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the warmth in her eyes. He told himself maybe she wanted to apologize, maybe she would change her mind. But a small, anxious voice inside him whispered something else. What if she was coming to say goodbye for good? The next day dragged on painfully. He tried working at the shop but couldn't focus. Every ticking sound from a clock or buzzing radio made him more restless. When evening came, he cleaned his tools, locked up early, and went home to wait. The town outside was quiet, lights dimming one by one. She finally sent him a message, short and clear. "Meet me near the old cemetery road at 9. I just want to talk." He read it again and again. His hands trembled slightly as he put on his jacket. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with dread. He didn't like the place she'd chosen. The cemetery always gave him a strange feeling, but it was one of the few spots in town where they could meet without being seen. The night air was cool when he stepped outside. A faint mist hung low over the fields. As he drove toward the cemetery, his headlights cut through the fog, lighting up the narrow road ahead. The old stone walls came into view, covered with moss and ivy. He parked under a big oak tree just outside the gate and waited. Every passing second felt heavier. He tapped the steering wheel nervously, watching the empty road. Then, in the distance, he saw her car's headlights. She pulled up quietly beside him, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. When she stepped out, her face looked tired. She stood with her arms folded as if trying to guard herself from something. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. He nodded, unsure what to say. They walked a few steps into the cemetery, where an old stone bench stood beneath a tree. The fog made everything look ghostly. Crickets chirped in the grass. It was so quiet that even their footsteps sounded loud. She started speaking first. Her tone was calm but distant, as if she'd practiced what to say. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "About us, about everything. This can't continue." He looked at her, confused. "Why? I thought we were happy." "It's not about being happy," she said. "It's about doing what's right. We both know this isn't right. I can't keep living like this." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He tried to reason with her, telling her they could make it work somehow. But she shook her head gently, saying it wasn't possible. She said she needed to fix her life, focus on her marriage, and move on. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind rustled through the leaves. Then he whispered, "So that's it?" She didn't answer. She just looked at him sadly, like she was sorry but firm in her decision. Inside, something cracked. He felt an ache so strong it made his chest tighten. He wanted to beg her to stay, to tell her she was making a mistake, but he saw in her eyes that she'd already made up her mind. Nothing he said would change it. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she turned to leave. "Please understand," she said. "I wish things were different." He stood frozen, watching her walk away toward her car. The mist seemed thicker now, swallowing her shape as she moved farther away. He felt an emptiness like a hole opening inside him. The night pressed close, heavy and suffocating. After a few minutes, he walked slowly back to his car. His hands were cold. His mind was spinning. He sat there for a long time, staring through the windshield, seeing nothing. Every memory of her flashed in his head like scenes from another. Her laughter, her kindness, the way she once said, "You understand me." He didn't know how long he sat there. The clock on the dashboard ticked past midnight. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted. The world was quiet again, but inside him, nothing was quiet. He finally drove home, moving slowly through the empty streets. When he reached his house, he sat outside for a while, unable to go in. The night's fog clung to the car windows, blurring the reflection of his own face. He looked older, harder, like someone he didn't recognize. In the days that followed, he went back to work as if nothing had happened. He fixed radios, spoke politely to customers, and kept his small smile. But something in his eyes had changed. The warmth was gone. He ate little, slept less. He stopped visiting the cafe where they used to meet. At night, he walked along the road that led past the cemetery, telling himself he just wanted to clear his head. But deep down, he knew he was hoping to see her car again, to find her waiting like before. Each time, the road was empty. Only the sound of the wind and the creak of the old cemetery gate kept him company. People around town noticed he looked different. Some thought he was sick. Others assumed he was just tired from work. No one guessed the storm he was carrying inside. One evening, about a week later, he sat alone on his porch, staring at the quiet street. The sky was heavy with clouds, and a soft drizzle began to fall. He thought about her again, about her smile, her voice, the way she said goodbye. He couldn't let go of the thought that maybe she owed him more, that she shouldn't have walked away like that. That night, something in him began to shift. A strange, restless energy took over, a feeling that wouldn't let him sleep or think clearly. He wanted to see her one last time, just to talk, just to understand. He told himself it wasn't wrong, that he just needed answers. But sometimes, when pain turns to obsession, people lose sight of where the line is. And in his quiet little town, that line was about to. The fog hung low over the town that night, thick and heavy, like a soft blanket pressed against the streets and fields. It muffled every sound, hiding the ordinary world from view. The man drove, slowly, the hum of the engine blending with the soft tapping of rain against the windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, and his mind replayed the past week over and over. Each memory twisted inside him like a knot that refused to untangle. The thought of her, walking away from him, not answering his calls, not wanting to see him again, burned in his chest. He told himself this meeting was just to talk, just to understand. He told himself it would help him let go. But deep down, a darker, heavier feeling settled over him. It was a cold, insistent pressure, like something had shifted inside and could not be pushed back. He reached the cemetery. The tall iron gate creaked as he pushed it open, a sound that echoed into the mist. The path was narrow and uneven, lined with old stones and the shadows of trees that had stood for generations. The place had always been quiet, even in daylight. At night, it was almost otherworldly. The gravestones standing like silent witnesses, the wind whispering through the leaves. He parked near the old oak tree where they had met before. He waited, staring at the stone bench beneath the tree, imagining her walking toward him, imagining her face turning soft when she saw him. Minutes passed. The fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The distant sound of a train horn reached him and he jumped slightly, tension coiling in his stomach. Then finally headlights appeared through the mist. She had come. Her car stopped quietly a few yards away. She stepped out slowly, holding her coat around herself, her hair damp from the drizzle. She looked tired, her face pale, her lips pressed together as if she had been rehearsing what to say. The man got out of his car, his body stiff, every step heavy with the weight of anticipation. They met near the stone bench. She didn't smile, not even a little. Her eyes searched his face and he felt a shiver run down his spine. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Her voice was calm but distant, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. He nodded, trying to keep his own voice steady. I needed to see you." She looked down at the ground for a moment, then back at him. "I know, but I need to be honest. This can't go on." His stomach tightened. "Why? We were fine." "Weren't we?" "It's not about fine," she said quietly. "It's not right. I can't keep meeting you like this. I have to go back to my life, to my family. You have to let me go." He wanted to protest. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she belonged with him, that they could make a life together if they tried. But he felt the words stick in his throat, tangled in fear and confusion. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. "I can change things. We can make it work." She shook her head. "No, it's too late. I've made my decision. I need to do what's right. I'm sorry." A cold emptiness spread inside him. He could feel it growing, expanding, filling every part of him. He tried to focus on her words, to understand them, to accept them. But the ache was too deep, too strong. He felt as if the world had tilted, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. For a few moments, silence hung between them, broken only by the rustling leaves and the distant drip of water from the trees. The cemetery felt alive in a way it never had before, the gravestones like silent sentinels watching everything unfold. Then, almost instinctively, he reached out, grabbing her arm. "Please, just listen to me," he said. His voice trembled, the desperation leaking through. She pulled her arm back, startled, and her eyes widened. "Don't," she said firmly, stepping back. "You can't do this. You have to let me go." But he couldn't. He wanted to understand, to fix this, to stop the world from ending the way it felt like it had. He stepped closer and she stepped back again, her hands raised slightly as if to protect herself. "Please," he whispered. "Just don't leave me. Just one more minute." The fog seemed to thicken around them, and in that strange, silent world, the tension between them grew unbearable. The man's chest felt tight, his mind spinning with thoughts he couldn't control. He could see the firmness in her eyes, the sadness, the fear, and it made something inside him ache even more. He wanted to scream, to plead, to force her to understand, but he didn't know how. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and old flowers from the cemetery. It reminded him of the first time they had met, of her laughter, of her voice, of the way she had looked at him like he mattered. That memory, sweet and tender, clashed with the anger and fear that had been building inside him. Then suddenly she moved to leave. The man froze, watching her walk toward her car, and a part of him felt a pang of terror. He couldn't let her go. He thought about all the conversations, all the promises, all the moments they had shared. Could it really end just like this? His heart pounded as he ran after her. "Wait!" he called, but the words sounded weak even to him. She turned, fear and resolve mixed in her eyes. "No, I've made up my mind," she said. Her voice was steady now, firmer than his own shaking one. "You have to stop this." The distance between them closed in seconds, and the man grabbed her hand gently at first, then tighter. He was desperate to keep her there, to make her see him, to make her change her mind. But she pulled back, trying to break free. In the mist and shadows of the cemetery, the world seemed to shrink. The gravestones stood taller, the trees loomed closer, and the night air felt thick with the tension between them. The man's mind was a storm of confusion, fear, and grief. He couldn't think clearly. He just knew he couldn't let her go. They struggled for a moment, a brief collision of two worlds, one filled with hope and love, the other filled with fear and resistance. His heart raced, his hands shook, and the cold night air seemed to press against his chest. She pushed him away, her face pale, her breath quick. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos ended. She stood a few feet away, staring at him with wide eyes, and he froze, realizing the enormity of what had just happened. The silence returned, heavier than before. The fog wrapped around them, hiding everything else, making it seem as if the cemetery itself was holding its breath. The man looked at her, panic rising in his chest. Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She didn't answer. She looked at him, her eyes full of something he couldn't read. And then she turned slowly, walking toward her car again. He wanted to follow, to fix it, to say something that would make everything better, but his body felt heavy, his mind spinning. He stopped, standing still as the night swallowed her form. He breathed in deeply, trying to calm himself. The mist clung to his clothes and hair, and he felt the chill settle into his bones. For a moment he just stood there, staring at the path she had taken, replaying every second in his mind. The tension, the fear, the grief, and it all hit him at once. Finally he turned and walked back toward his car. Each step felt heavier than the last. The cemetery, which had always seemed quiet and safe, now felt like a place of judgment, filled with shadows that whispered and stones that watched. He drove home slowly, the fog wrapping around his car like a blanket. When he reached his small house, he sat in the car for a long time, staring at the dashboard lights and listening to the rain fall softly. He didn't know what to do next. Part of him wanted to call her, to apologize, to beg her to stay. Another part of him wanted to disappear, to hide, to pretend nothing had happened. That night, sleep did not come. He sat by the window, watching the mist roll over the fields, thinking about the woman and the life that could no longer exist between them. He thought about her words, her calm voice, and the firmness in her eyes. He thought about the empty space where hope used to be and felt something deep and unfamiliar, a mixture of guilt, longing, and fear. The next morning, he went to work, pretending everything was normal. He greeted customers with a polite smile, fixed radios and machines, and tried to focus on the ordinary. But inside, the memory of the cemetery, the mist, and her face lingered. Every sound, every shadow, every quiet moment reminded him of that night. He began walking the streets more at night, passing the cemetery road slowly, hoping, waiting, fearing what he might see. And though he told himself he was trying to understand, trying to accept the past, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him, that the world he knew had tilted in a way he could not fix. The quiet little town continued to sleep, unaware of the storm brewing in the life of one of its quiet residents. The fog would return again, and the cemetery would remain silent and watching, as the man's thoughts and feelings twisted and grew, shaping the choices he would soon be forced to face. And somewhere in the distance, eyes that belonged to no one he knew were watching, waiting, recording every moment he thought was private, unseen, and alone. A blur in a way no one could ever imagine. The cemetery had always been a quiet place at night. Most townspeople avoided it after dark, thinking of the old stones and long-forgotten graves as reminders of things better left alone. But for one man, it was part of his nightly routine. He was the caretaker, an older man who had worked there for years. His job was simple: keep the grounds tidy, make sure the gates were locked at night, and check on the graves that needed attention. The work was quiet, predictable, and it suited him. That night, as he settled into his small wooden hut near the cemetery gate, he had no idea that he would witness something he could never forget. He had gone to bed early, The soft creak of his rocking chair under him, listening to the distant sounds of the town settle into sleep. A fog had rolled in, thick and cold, making the cemetery look almost like a different world. But sleep didn't come easily. A faint sound stirred him, soft voices carried on the wind, voices that didn't belong to the usual night creatures. At first he thought it might be a couple walking home from a late errand, but the voices were sharper, more urgent, and there was an edge of fear in them that caught his attention. Curiosity won over caution. He rose slowly, his feet quiet on the wooden floor, and stepped outside. The cold air hit him, sharp and damp, the fog curling around his legs. He could see faint lights through the mist moving slowly along the path that led past the old oak tree and the stone bench. He squinted and realized two figures were there. A man and a woman, their shapes blurred by the fog. At first he could not hear them clearly. The wind carried only snippets, a word here, a plea there. But even from a distance he sensed tension. The way they moved, the way the man's hand reached toward the woman, the way she stepped back, and it was not ordinary. There was fear and there was desperation. Something was wrong. The caretaker crouched behind a large tombstone, keeping his distance. He did not want to be seen. In all his years he had never had to intervene in anything like this. His life had been quiet, orderly. He was just supposed to watch, to take care of the place. But now, watching those two figures, he felt a mix of fear and responsibility he had never felt before. The man spoke first, his voice low, almost pleading. "Please, just listen," he said. The caretaker could hear the tremor in his tone, the desperation. The woman replied softly, firmly, trying to pull away, trying to set boundaries, trying to leave. The caretaker felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew from experience that words alone could not explain what people felt in moments like this. That sometimes emotions carried people into places they did not intend to go. The struggle lasted only a few moments, but it felt longer to the caretaker. He watched the man reach for the woman again, and he could see the panic in her movements. The way she tried to pull free. She stumbled slightly over the uneven ground. The man froze, and for a moment the fog seemed to wrap them in silence. The caretaker's heart raced. He had never imagined himself a witness to anything so private, so intense, so fragile. He felt a moral weight pressing on him. Should he step out? Should he intervene? Should he shout? But he stayed hidden, unsure of what would happen, unsure if his presence would make things worse. The figures moved again, a sudden burst of motion that made the caretaker duck instinctively. The man seemed to struggle with his own emotions, reaching, pleading, trying to grasp something he could not hold. The woman's voice was firm but soft, telling him to stop, to let go, to accept that this could not continue. Then, almost as quickly as it began, the chaos ended. The man froze in place and the woman stepped back, her face pale in the dim light. She turned slowly, walking away toward her car. The caretaker exhaled quietly, relieved that the immediate danger seemed to have passed. But relief did not last long. He stayed behind the tombstone, watching as the man lingered motionless, the fog curling around him like a shroud. The man looked at the path where the woman had disappeared, his body stiff, his hands trembling. There was something in his posture, something in the way he held himself that made the caretaker uneasy. He could feel the tension radiating from the man, a heavy, unspoken pressure that seemed to fill the cemetery itself. The caretaker knew enough about people to understand that something had changed that night. He had seen grief, anger, fear, and desperation in his time, but never all at once and never in a quiet, ordinary man like this one. The situation was delicate, dangerous, and yet he felt powerless to intervene. Hours passed. The fog began to lift slightly, revealing the outlines of gravestones and the silhouette of the old oak tree. The man finally walked toward his car, moving slowly, almost as if in a daze. The caretaker stayed hidden until the engine started, and the vehicle disappeared into the misty night. Only then did he move quietly, carefully toward the spot where the woman had been. The ground was damp, the earth soft underfoot. The caretaker's old hands trembled as he checked around the stone bench. Everything seemed in place except for the small signs of the struggle he had witnessed. A scuff mark on the ground, a piece of fabric caught on a branch. He whispered a prayer under his breath, asking for guidance, for strength, for clarity. Returning to his hut, he could not shake the images from his mind. The man's face, the woman's pale features, the way the fog had made everything feel unreal. They stayed with him like shadows in a room he could not leave. He tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. His thoughts circled endlessly, replaying the scene over and over, each time with more clarity, more fear, more understanding. By morning, he was exhausted. He had barely closed his eyes when the first light touched the cemetery, washing the gravestones with a cold, pale glow. He stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air, and looked over the grounds. Everything seemed calm, ordinary, almost peaceful. But he knew better. He had seen something that would not leave him. He tried to go about his routine, trimming grass, checking the graves, locking gates, but his mind kept drifting back to the night. He thought about the man, about the woman, about the tension he had felt so strongly. He wondered if anyone else had noticed, if anyone else had seen the same struggle, if anyone would understand the weight of what had occurred. The caretaker's unease grew as days passed. The fog returned in the evenings, curling through the trees and gravestones, making the cemetery feel alive and watchful. Every time he heard the distant sound of a car or footsteps along the path, his heart skipped a beat. He wanted to speak to someone, to tell someone what he had seen, but he was afraid. Afraid of being dismissed, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being involved in something larger than he could handle. Finally, after several days of internal struggle, he decided he could not remain silent. He wrote a short note, careful with every word. It was factual, clear, and concise. He described seeing two figures in the cemetery, a man and a woman, the tension between them and the struggle he had witnessed. He left out interpretations, leaving only what he had seen and heard. He left the note where it could be found, in the hands of someone who might take it seriously, someone who could act. And then he returned to his work, trying to pretend that life had returned to normal, though he knew it never could. Even as he tended the graves, he kept an eye on the paths, listening for voices, watching for shadows. He knew the man and the woman would return to the cemetery in his thoughts, in his dreams, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn. The caretaker had always known that cemeteries held memories, that they carried the weight of lives gone by, but he had never imagined that a single night could leave a mark so deep, so sharp that it would change the way he saw the world. The town itself remained unaware. People went about their lives. Children played in the streets, shopkeepers opened their doors, and neighbors waved from their porches. To everyone else, the cemetery was just a quiet place, a backdrop to their ordinary lives. But for the caretaker, it had become a place of vigilance, of secrets, of heavy truths that could not be ignored. As nights passed, he continued his quiet watch. Sometimes he would glimpse movement along the paths. Sometimes the fog would thicken in ways that made shadows dance. He knew he was not imagining things. That night had happened, and its consequences were quietly unfolding. Every sound, every shadow, every misty evening reminded him of the struggle, the fear, and the desperation he had seen. And somewhere in the distance, though no one else could know, the man who had been part of that struggle also wrestled with his own thoughts. He could not escape the memory of the woman, of the tension, of the silence that followed. The caretaker sensed this, knew that what he had witnessed was only the beginning, and that the quiet town was about to be drawn into a story it would never forget. The caretaker remained there, tending graves and watching shadows, a silent witness to a world that had shifted in ways most people could not see. He had seen more than anyone should have to see, and he knew that some part of him would always carry that night. A night when emotions ran wild, when fear and desire collided, and when life and fate had hung in a delicate, fragile balance. The morning after that foggy night, the cemetery seemed to hold its breath. The dew lay thick on the grass, and the sun struggled to cut through the lingering mist. The caretaker had risen early as usual, walking slowly along the paths he knew so well, yet his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the struggle he had witnessed, about the man and the woman, about the tension that had hung so thick in the fog. Every step he took felt heavier than normal, and every sound, the crow of a rooster, the flap of a bird's wings, made him pause, alert and uneasy. It was then that the first sign of discovery came. A passerby walking along the road that ran past the cemetery noticed something unusual. A scarf lying near one of the gravestones, damp and crumpled. The person picked it up and, puzzled, brought it to the local authorities. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered near the cemetery gate. Neighbors whispered to one another, curiosity mixing with unease. Something had happened here. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't know what. The man arrived at his workshop that morning, trying to pretend nothing had changed. He greeted customers with his usual quiet smile, handed back radios and small appliances, and nodded politely to those who spoke to him. But inside, a storm was raging. Every glance, every murmur from the street made him flinch. He replayed the previous night endlessly in his mind, analyzing every movement, every word, every gesture. He could not shake the memory of her pale face, the tension in her voice, the desperation in his own hands as he tried to hold her back. He felt guilt creeping in, an unfamiliar companion that pressed on him constantly. At first he tried to ignore it. He told himself she had left him, that it was her choice, that it was over. But the emptiness inside him was growing, and with it the sense that something had gone terribly wrong. Every time he walked past the cemetery, he felt a chill run down his spine. He avoided the path where she had been, avoided thinking about the struggle, yet it haunted him relentlessly. The authorities arrived later that morning. They were methodical, moving quietly among the gravestones, examining the ground, making notes, taking photographs. The caretaker observed from a distance, his hands folded tightly in front of him. He wanted to speak, to explain what he had seen, but fear rooted him to the spot. What if no one believed him? What if he became part of the story instead of just an observer? As the investigation unfolded, the town buzzed with speculation. People whispered behind closed doors, sharing fragments of information and rumors. The man tried to stay out of sight, pretending to be just another concerned neighbor, but he could feel eyes on him, even when no one was looking. The guilt he had tried to push aside now pressed on him relentlessly, making it hard to focus, hard to sleep, hard to breathe. The caretaker, meanwhile, wrestled with his own conscience. He knew he could not stay silent forever. He had seen too much, and the weight of that memory was becoming unbearable. After long hours of internal debate, he decided to act. He wrote a careful note describing what he had seen, sticking to the facts, avoiding any interpretation or accusation. He handed it anonymously to the authorities, hoping it would be taken seriously. Within a day, the note reached the hands of the lead detective assigned to the case. The words were simple but precise. He described seeing a man and a woman near the stone bench, the struggle, the desperation, the way the man had moved and the woman had reacted. The detective read it slowly, frowning, sensing the weight behind the words. Something in the note hinted at more than just a disagreement. It hinted at a deep, dangerous tension that had gone unchecked. Evidence began to accumulate. Tire tracks near the cemetery path matched vehicles known to belong to a few locals. Footprints in the soft, wet grass suggested someone had walked there late at night. Items found near the scene, including the scarf, were bagged and labeled for examination. The investigation moved quietly but steadily, a silent web closing in on the truth. The man, unaware of the caretaker's note, began to feel the walls of his life shrinking. He noticed neighbors looking at him differently, a subtle wariness in their greetings, a hesitation in their voices. Each day became more suffocating. He tried to keep busy at work, fixing machines, answering questions, nodding politely, but his thoughts never strayed far from that night. He replayed it endlessly, imagining what might have been seen, what might be known, and what might be discovered. Guilt had become a constant companion. He started avoiding the cemetery altogether, taking longer routes home, walking slowly past the paths he had traveled before. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the memory of her face and her voice replaying like a silent film. He tried to tell himself that he had done nothing wrong, that she had walked away, that it had been over before it started. But reason offered little comfort against the weight of fear and self-recrimination. Meanwhile, the caretaker remained vigilant. He continued his nightly rounds, his eyes scanning the paths, his ears listening for anything unusual. He knew that his note had triggered further investigation, that authorities were now piecing together the puzzle, yet he also sensed that the story was far from complete, that the man and the woman, and the emotions that had played out in the fog, were only part of a larger truth. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation began to draw subtle attention from the town. Authorities asked questions, collected statements, and quietly examined evidence. Some neighbors were interviewed. Others observed from a distance, trying to make sense of the whispers and rumors. The man, still unaware of the extent of the scrutiny, felt the tightening grip of anxiety. He began to second-guess every action, every conversation, every glance. He started noticing things he hadn't before. A police car parked near the edge of town. Unfamiliar faces at the market. Subtle questions from those who usually ignored him. The guilt and fear inside him twisted together, creating a relentless tension that made each day feel heavier than the last. Every time he thought about that night, every time he remembered the struggle, every time he remembered her face, the panic rose, sometimes sharp and sudden, sometimes a dull ache in his chest. The caretaker watched all of this quietly, knowing he had started a chain of events that could not be stopped. He had done what he felt was right, but he could not predict how the man would react, how the town would respond, or how the truth would ultimately unfold. Still, he continued his rounds, tending to the graves, checking the fences, and keeping his eyes and ears open. One afternoon, the detective returned to the cemetery, asking more detailed questions. He spoke to the caretaker, noting the precise layout of the paths, the locations of the stones, and the proximity of the bench to the old oak tree. He listened carefully to every word, scribbling notes, nodding thoughtfully. The caretaker provided what he could, careful not to speculate, careful not to exaggerate. But even in those simple facts, the detective sensed something deeper, an undercurrent of emotion, fear, and tension that had not been visible to the town before. Meanwhile, the man could feel the tightening noose of suspicion. He started to notice every small detail, the way people looked at him on the street, the way they whispered when he passed, the way neighbors glanced toward the cemetery as if waiting for him to appear. Sleep became difficult. He would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that night, thinking about her, thinking about what might happen next. Fear grew in him alongside guilt. He began to imagine that everyone knew, that everyone could see the truth in his eyes. He tried to tell himself that nothing had happened, that he was innocent, that the night had ended with her walking away safely. But the weight of uncertainty and self-recrimination was impossible to ignore. The caretaker, observing quietly, began to notice subtle signs in the man's behavior. The avoidance of certain streets, the sudden hesitation in greetings, the restless pacing at odd hours. He sensed the inner turmoil, the guilt that gnawed at the man, the awareness that something in the town was shifting even if it was not yet clear to everyone. The investigation slowly gained momentum. Evidence, notes, and observations were compiled carefully. The police moved with patience, understanding that a case like this required precision, that mistakes could be costly. The tension in the town increased subtly. People whispered, glanced, speculated, but few knew the full story. The man remained at the center, unaware of the caretaker's role, unaware that every choice he made was quietly observed and recorded by someone who had seen everything unfold. And all the while, the man struggled alone, wrestling with his own mind, his own guilt, and the weight of actions he could not fully control. Each night he returned home exhausted, restless, and haunted. Each day he forced himself to work, to smile, to pretend. But the emptiness, the fear, and the knowledge that something irreparable had happened grew heavier with every passing hour. The caretaker continued his watch, tending the graves, walking the paths, listening to the wind, and keeping a careful record in his mind. He had seen too much to ignore it. He had heard too much to forget it, and he knew, quietly, that the story was far from over, that the consequences of that night would continue to unfold in ways that would touch everyone involved, in ways that no one could yet predict. The town remained unaware, the streets calm, the shopkeepers opening doors, children playing, and neighbors waving from porches. But beneath the surface, the world had shifted. A delicate, fragile balance had been disturbed. And in that silence, the observer waited, knowing that the truth, once uncovered, would change lives forever. The town had returned to its usual rhythm, or at least it seemed that way. Shops opened and closed on time. Children ran along the streets, neighbors waved from porches. But beneath the ordinary sounds, a quiet tension had settled. Some people whispered about the events at the cemetery, while others simply tried to ignore it. The authorities were patient, collecting evidence and speaking to anyone who might have seen something unusual. The man tried to move through his days as if nothing had changed, but inside he was unraveling.